G'day guys, and welcome to another YouTube lesson. Today we're going to take a look at the first topic, which is nature of business. We're looking at the second of the four subtopics. The name of that, continuing on from last lesson, is the types of business. We're going to be addressing the syllabus dot point classification of business. Now there's four key ways in which you can classify a business. We're going to be taking a look at three of those in this YouTube clip in this lesson today. The first way in which you can classify a business is based on its size. Is it small, medium, or large? The term that's important too is SME. You'll hear that a little bit in the Year 11 course. That stands for small to medium enterprises. We also have micro businesses, which are very small businesses, up to 5 employees, and they're part of that small business model. So you're able to classify a business, categorize a business based on its size. Another way to be able to classify or categorize a business is the scale at which it operates. And there does tend to be this connection, this relationship between the size of the business and the scale of the business, i.e. local business in terms of a scale where it's operating tends to be a smaller size business. A large, probably publicly listed company tends to be a business that operates on a global and international scale. Now the final way that we're going to be looking in today's lesson about how to classify a business is through the industry sector. And there's 5 different industry sectors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first one of these is the primary industry sector, and that's things like farms. There's secondary, which is manufacturing, and the third main one is the tertiary sector. It's the services sector. Because the tertiary sector is so large, it's then divided into 2 other sectors that we've seen in more modern times. That is the quinary sector, which is the traditional domestic-based tasks and jobs, and the quaternary sector, which is the information processes sector. Now, a bit more detail on each of these ways to classify a business. The first way to classify a business, again, as I said to you before, is based on the size of a business. It can be small, medium, or large. Okay, in terms of small, they're between 1 and 19 employees. It's not to do with owners of the business. It's not legal structure. That's another way to classify a business we'll look at in future lessons. But to do with the number of employees that work inside the business. Now, there's also these micro businesses, which is like a little subsection of small business. And they have between 1 and 5 employees. Now, if you have a medium-sized business, you'll find that you've got between 20 workers, employees, and up to and including 199 employees. Large businesses, which traditionally are publicly listed companies, maybe really big private companies, they have 200 or more workers, 200 more employees. Okay, now you'll see later on that certain size businesses will tend to favour different legal structures, i.e. small businesses will generally be sole traders or partnerships, whereas large businesses, in terms of size, tend to be public companies. And we'll talk more about that in future lessons. But size, first off, that's the main first way to categorise a business. The next way to categorise a business, you'll see in your syllabus, it doesn't say this, it should. It says local, national and global. What does that mean? Well, that's talking about the scale, the area in which it operates. Okay, is it just a local? Does it operate, internationally like global, or in between, nationally? Now, so as I said, there were 3 different scales or jurisdictions that a business can operate in. They range from a small geographical area right up to a real large one in terms of global scale. Now, the smallest one is known as local. This is a business that operates in just the local suburb really only, maybe a few businesses within the neighbouring suburbs at most. An example of this type of business would be a local corner store. They're often very small in size, these local scale businesses, and they're generally only small businesses, if not even that micro size business. Now, the second of the scale way to categorise the business is national. These are businesses that operate in more than one state, i.e. nationally operated companies. Example of that would be Coles. Maybe it's sort of dipped its toe overseas, but generally we're talking about it being a nationwide business. It operates in New South Wales, Queensland, Tassie, and so on and so on. Not all around the world like Nike or Apple do. These are generally medium-sized businesses or, more commonly, large-sized businesses. So if you're smart, and I know a lot of you are, some not so much, okay, but if you're smart, you're probably making the connection now between size and scale, as I said before. National-sized businesses, medium, or large-sized businesses. All right, they're often private or more often public companies. Global is the last type of scale in terms of putting that business in its box and being able to categorise it. These are businesses that operate overseas, operate internationally. They're known as TNCs, transnational corporations. Some popular examples include Nike and Apple. They are generally always large companies, and they're usually public companies, not private. But say Audi would probably be an example of one of these two, and it's one of the world's largest private companies. It's divided into two, but it's still a private company. Now, that being said, with all of this, sole traders could in theory be a global business, but I've never heard of one with just one owner having a huge amount, 300 or 400 employees and operating on a global scale, but that's unlikely. Now, the next way to be able to categorise a business, and the last way we're going to look at in this lesson, is based on industry, or more appropriately, industry sector. Now, there's 5 industry sectors we look at. There's really kind of 3, but the third one, being the tertiary sector, is massive, especially in a country like Australia, and therefore we've divided that into 2 to be able to better, I guess, categorise each of the different parts of the tertiary sector. So, the first sector, or the first 2 sectors, which is the primary and the secondary sector, they deal with physical, tangible goods. All right. The third one, tertiary, and the fourth and fifth that go with tertiary, they deal with the services. Now, in terms of the primary sector, we have a fair bit of that in Australia. It's not what most people are employed in Australia, but it probably brings in a large percentage of income into Australia for the amount of workers that work there. It's very profitable for Australia. We wouldn't be the wealthy country we are today without the primary sector. Now, the primary sector includes all the businesses in which production is directly associated with natural resources, and all the production begins here. Some examples of primary sector include farming, mining, fishing, and forestry. The farming and the mining are 2 of the bigger drivers of the economy in Australia in terms of generating money for Aussies. Okay, and that's where, with the prime industry, you're digging the stuff out of the ground, or you're farming, the sheep, the cattle, etc., the corn, the wheat. All right, the secondary industry. You can say that your business is in the secondary industry if it's involved in manufacturing. So the secondary industry includes all those businesses that take the output of firms in the primary sector. So they say, thank you, primary sector, much appreciated. And it's the raw materials they get, and they manufacture that. They make tangible items for industry and for consumers. All right. We don't have much of that anymore in Australia. A lot of developing nations who have cheap labour, like China and other parts of Southeast Asia, Mexico too, they have a lot of manufacturing. We used to have a bit of that, but not so much anymore. Now, the last part of this is the tertiary sector, that service-based sector. The vast majority of Aussies work in the tertiary sector. Your fine, intelligent, sophisticated, some would even say handsome teacher is employed in the tertiary sector. The doctor that you might go to, a lawyer, hopefully you don't need to, might or does work in the tertiary sector, but childcare workers, chefs, cleaners, they're part of the tertiary sector too. Anyone in retail is part of that tertiary sector as well. Now, two parts of the tertiary sector, because I said it's so massive in Australia, it's been divided in two. One is kind of the wealthy part of the tertiary sector. The other part is what the tasks that used to be done inside the home, domestic chores, domestic related industries. They're part of the tertiary sector, but they don't pay so well. Now, the quaternary industry includes services that involve the transfer and processing of information and knowledge. And that's what teachers, doctors, lawyers, financial analysts, people working with information, okay, they're part of that sector. The last part of the tertiary sector is the quinary industry or quinary sector. It includes all services that have been traditionally performed in the home. So I talked about domestic jobs before. Some examples of these include hospitality, childcare, tourism, all of those sort of things, chef, etc., restaurant work, and so on. All right, guys, thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next lesson.